Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. My name is Megan Delap, and for this week's discussion in American Christian Heritage, I will be talking about the history of the Moravians, particularly the traits that make them different from a lot of the other established settlements in colonial America at the time. Now, there were many settlements that spanned throughout the United States in the colonial period, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, many other places. But for this week's discussion, I'm going to be specifically talking about the Moravians in North Carolina. Most of my research and records have come from records of the Moravians in North Carolina, as well as records of the Moravians among the Cherokee. Now, most of these records, like I said, do talk specifically about the settlements in North Carolina, such as Bethabara, which was established in 1753, Bethania in 1759, and Salem in 1766. Now, there were a lot of things that really set the Moravians apart from a lot of other religious settlements at the time, particularly the treatment of women within the church and within the society as a whole. Moravian women had a lot more liberty in regards to things like marriage and dress in the Moravian church that really kind of made them stand out, and at times really deemed the Moravians quite radical. So I've pulled a quote here from Road to Salem, which is pretty much just talking about the story of Anna Katharina, pulling a lot of the quotes and the language that she used throughout her development of her story. So, reading this conversation between Sister Edwine and Sister Katharina, she says, "Sister Katharina, I have a message for you. I come to bring you a proposal of marriage from Brother Reuter. This has been approved, and we hope you will consent. There are many reasons why it is wise for a widow to remarry here, for we have no arrangements for a widow's house, and you are too young to spend the rest of your life sewing and taking care of the nursery." Now, this was pretty substantial for the time, considering how marriage was considered a sacred embodiment throughout many churches in the colonial period. But just noting how it was more liquid in the Moravian church, and noting how women had more of a choice in the Moravian church if they were widowed to remarry. Another thing that really makes the Moravians unique was also their the ability for women to choose whether or not they wanted to partake in marriage. Once the church deemed marriage reasonable, after a brother had asked for the hand of a young Moravian woman, the Moravian sister could then either accept the marriage or deny that marriage if she chose to do so. So just noting how that's really an important aspect, that liberty that they had in regards to their marriage. Now, while it's important to talk about these things that are really positive and to look at things that really set the Moravians apart for the time period, it's also important to note things that might not have really established such a great history. According to course guidelines, historians must be honest and objective in their research. So, talking about those hard histories, one of which includes the history of slavery, particularly in the settlements of North Carolina. Now, for the Moravians, they had a lot of different conceptions of race. For them, the issue of slavery was not necessarily an issue of race starting out with their involvement with the institution. It was more so something that was established by God. If someone was born into slavery, it wasn't necessarily because of their race. It was more so just because it was their destiny. Now, Sensenbach, in his article, talks about the freedom of the soul, not the body. Moravians believed in the freedom of that soul. Everyone was equal in regards of the soul plane. But the body, however, was not something that was really considered free or equal. So just noting this quote too, the emphasis stamped the Moravian approach to race in two ways. First, all people had souls deemed worthy of salvation. The Church's universal approach to conversion stood out at a time when many Protestants remained convinced that Africans and Indians were devils, that a dark skin reflected a dark soul. Secondly, however, because they were unconcerned with race as a worldly concept, the Brethren had little inclination to challenge the ways race was being used to construct massive social inequalities in the emerging Atlantic world. However, though we had this different treatment of slaves within the Moravian society, so the ability for enslaved peoples to join the church. It's important to note that even though they might have had better treatment, it's really all bad. Slavery in all contexts is bad, because even though they might have better standards of living, they are still owned by another individual. But we go on to see that there is a progression in racial considerations as time goes on, and finding this unbiased perspective specifically in the journals, so the records of the Moravians in North Carolina, we see instances of mistreatment among the slaves that were housed by the Moravians, specifically in North Carolina for this context. And if we read here for the entry for June 1st, as the Negro Caesar had behaved very badly, he was whipped and sent away from the tavern. So just noting the treatment of these slaves as enslaved people is really important, just to establish that, slavery in all contexts was bad. Although they might have treated their slaves different than other religious settlements at the time or other non-religious settlements at the time, it was still an inherently bad institution, and the history really fully needs to be considered from that regard. Thank you.